This incredible feat of architecture is not the most revolutionary thing about this place.
For thousands of years, we've believed that civilization developed in a very specific order. First, humans learned to farm. Then they settled into permanent communities. Then they developed organized societies. And finally, they began building monumental structures. But what if that timeline is wrong? In southeastern Turkey, archaeologists discovered a site that predates the pyramids by thousands of years. It's called Göbekli Tepe. The people who built it weren't kings or farmers. They were hunter-gatherers. And somehow, they were moving stones weighing several tons, carving elaborate animals into them, and constructing massive stone enclosures more than 11,000 years ago. But that's not even the strangest part. After the construction was complete, they buried the entire site. Archaeologists have spent the past 3 decades trying to figure out what it all means. And in 2026, researchers started using artificial intelligence to analyze the carvings and search for patterns that might explain who these people were and why they built this monument. Let's get into it. The hill. Nobody noticed. In 1963, researchers from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University surveyed a hill in southeastern Turkey, near the city of Şanlıurfa. They noticed broken limestone slabs poking through the dirt. But nobody realized they had just discovered one of the most important archaeological sites on Earth. They assumed it was just a medieval graveyard, made a note, and moved on. That note sat in an archive for 30 years as the final say on the site. Then, in 1994, a Kurdish shepherd noticed something odd while moving his flock across that same ridge. A stone, half buried, with an edge that was too flat, too regular to be natural. The discovery was reported to the local museum, where it eventually caught the attention of someone who knew exactly what to look for. A German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt, who'd spent years studying the region's prehistory, decided to take a look for himself. The moment he climbed that hill, he knew the 1963 survey had gotten it completely wrong. This wasn't a graveyard. It was something far older and far stranger. Schmidt began excavating at the site in 1995. Layer by layer, his team uncovered a complex of massive stone enclosures. There were at least 20 of these in circles or enclosures, one nested inside another. The geophysical scans suggested many more were still buried. And the deeper they looked, the stranger the site became. The circles were built from carefully shaped limestone pillars. At the center of each circle stood 2 pillars taller than the rest, cut into a distinctive T-shape. These weren't stones simply pulled from the ground and stacked into a wall. They had been deliberately shaped. Others had carvings of animals such as foxes, lions, vultures, and scorpions that had been cut with a steady, confident hand. Radiocarbon dating on the oldest layer put construction at roughly 9,600 BCE, about 11,600 years ago. That's 7,000 years older than the Great Pyramid and 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. That date changed the story completely. This specific period of human history, 10,000 years ago, is called the Pre-Pottery Neolithic. It's the stretch of time right before farming, pottery, and permanent villages became widespread across the Near East. Göbekli Tepe sits right at the start of it. So how did a society without metal tools or established building traditions manage to construct something this massive? Because before we can understand why a community of hunter-gatherers built the Göbekli Tepe, we first have to make sure they were capable of building it at all. An impossible timeline. The first problem is obvious when you look at the stones themselves. Those pillars are heavy, genuinely heavy. The largest pillars, actually raised and set into place, weigh somewhere between 10 and 16 tons. To put in perspective just how heavy that is, imagine trying to move a fully loaded school bus without any wheels or any kind of machinery. The only resources you have are wooden levers, rope, and a coordinated workforce. That sounds like it should be impossible, but the Göbekli Tepe is there. The stone pillars are standing. So how did they do it? According to archaeologists, crews of several dozen to 100 workers could move stones in this weight range a few hundred meters. That is roughly the actual distance from the quarries to the site. Researchers Gil Haklay from the Israel Antiquities Authority and Avi Gopher from Tel Aviv University ran a computer-simulated analysis based on those assumptions in 2020. Their simulation showed that it is possible to engineer the monumental structures at Gobekli Tepe using only primitive tools. It would require hard, patient, physically brutal work. But it isn't impossible. That moves the story forward to the next major question. How did these people have the skill to shape them so precisely in the first place? The surfaces of the best-preserved pillars are flat and even. The edges are clean, and the carvings are consistent. The kind of control and skill displayed in making these carvings is one that usually comes from a long tradition of practice. Which leaves us with two possibilities. The first one is that these people had been practicing this craft long before Gobekli Tepe, but archaeologists have not found any such place yet. Gobekli Tepe remains the oldest structure that remains of the ancient world. The other possibility is that they arrived at this level of skill unusually fast for a community with no prior tradition of monumental stonework to draw on. And that raises the real mystery sitting at the heart of this site. Normally, when archaeologists study a site with multiple layers, one basic rule holds. The oldest layer is the roughest. Skill builds up gradually. Each generation improves a little on the last. Gobekli Tepe breaks that rule completely. A skill going backward. The excavation revealed something strange when archaeologists compared the different layers of the site. The oldest structures were not the simplest. The oldest layer of stones, known as Layer 3, contained the largest and most elaborate enclosures. These were the structures with the massive central pillars, some rising 5.5 meters above the ground. They are covered with dense, intricate carving on almost every surface. The layer built on top of it, Layer 2, is younger and noticeably less impressive. The pillars shrink down to just a meter or so in many cases. The carvings become simpler, sparser, and sometimes absent altogether. Archaeologists have been puzzled by this for years. On the surface, it looks like the more they built the site, the less skill they had, like a civilization losing its skills. Some archaeologists think the changes could reflect shifting social or religious practices. Others suggest that later communities simply had less reason or less ability to organize the enormous amount of labor required for the earlier structures. Some researchers have even questioned whether Layer 3's enclosures were really all built and used at the same time. They argue whether the layers represent a messier, more overlapping sequence than the tidy older versus younger picture suggests. If that's the case, some of the decline in craftsmanship might reflect differences between individual building projects rather than one continuous downward slope across the whole site. However, something all archaeologists agree on is that we still don't have a single clear explanation for why the site changed this way. But if that strange decline in craftsmanship is real, then there may be more hiding in these stones than just evidence of changing building styles. So what happens when we stop asking archaeologists what they see and ask a machine? The AI analysis. Recently, researchers have been using Grok to look for patterns in the carvings, and ask whether they might contain information we haven't recognized. The AI leaned heavily on one specific real theory that's circulated in archaeology since 2017. That theory centers on one particular carving, Pillar 43, sitting inside enclosure D, known as the Vulture Stone. It has some of the most striking carvings at the site. A vulture with an outstretched wing, a scorpion, a headless human figure, a prominent carved disc. For decades, nobody could say with certainty what these figures were supposed to represent. Then, in 2017, engineers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis argued something much bigger. They proposed that the animals on Pillar 43 aren't symbolic at all. They're constellations, and if that interpretation was correct, Pillar 43 was recording a particular configuration of the night sky, which they dated to around 10,950 BCE. That falls around the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt cooling whose cause remains debated. Sweatman and Tsikritsis connected the carving to the idea that a comet impact may have triggered that climatic event. It's a real, published, peer-reviewed paper, and after analyzing Göbekli Tepe, the AI agreed with that study. This is where the AI angle becomes genuinely interesting, because Grok didn't simply look at the carvings individually. It compared their positions, frequency, and repetition across the different enclosures. In other words, it wasn't just asking what a single animal meant, it was asking whether the builders were following a system. And according to the AI, some symbols appeared in patterns that looked more structured than ordinary decoration. It claimed that there might be rules that dictate which symbols appeared where. If that pattern is real, then the carvings may have been doing more than decorating the pillars. They may have been recording something. But the AI wasn't discovering an entirely new idea. It was lending support to a theory that archaeologists had already been debating for years, and that theory has some serious problems of its own. A disputed theory. Sweatman and Tsikritsis' comet theory made international headlines. It also drew serious pushback from the archaeologists who've actually excavated the Gobekli Tepe. The date the comet theory assigns to Pillar 43 is around 10,950 BCE. This is roughly 700 to 1,000 years older than the actual radiocarbon dating of those stones suggests. In other words, if the theory is right, the carving would have to come before the enclosure it sits inside by close to a millennium. That is a serious objection to the theory, and the dating problem isn't the only issue. The second objection is that the whole idea rests on one assumption. The Neolithic hunter-gatherers in Turkey grouped stars into the same constellations as the Egyptian and Greek astronomers who came thousands of years after them. Most archaeologists find that shaky at best because constellations aren't fixed in nature. They're cultural patterns humans draw onto the sky. There's no evidence to suggest that two unconnected cultures, separated by thousands of years, would draw the exact same lines. Supporters of the theory have pushed back on these criticisms. They argue that the combination is too specific to dismiss as coincidence. When researchers compared the animals carved on Pillar 43 with the positions of corresponding stars and constellations, they calculated how often those same figures could line up in a similar configuration by chance. Their estimate put the odds at less than 1 in 5 million. So the argument for the Younger Dryas impact theory isn't that a vulture or a scorpion appearing on a stone is unusual. It's that several different symbols appear together in positions that they believe correspond to a particular arrangement in the night sky from nearly 11,000 years ago. And if that's what the builders intended, then the carvings on Pillar 43 were following a deliberate system of symbols rather than simply depicting animals. The next question was whether that system appeared anywhere else at Gobekli Tepe. A network. Some of the AI-driven analysis described Göbekli Tepe as the hub of a coordinated network of buried sites stretching across the region that were deliberately concealed together as part of a unified plan. And there's real substance underneath this claim, because archaeologists really have found a network of related sites in this region. Göbekli Tepe genuinely isn't alone. Archaeologists working under a project called Taş Tepeler, meaning stone hills, have identified a cluster of related sites across the same region of southeastern Turkey. Many of them share the T-shaped pillar style and have been dated to the same time period. These sites tell us Göbekli Tepe wasn't an isolated one-off. It was part of a broader culture that built similar monuments across a wide stretch of land likely connected by shared beliefs, trade, or kinship. And one site in particular shows just how widespread this tradition may have been. That site is Karahan Tepe, and it has turned out to be almost as significant as Göbekli Tepe itself. Excavations there are still ongoing, but they have already uncovered their own T-shaped pillars with carved animal reliefs. Archaeologists at the site have even found a room with a row of carved heads emerging from a bench. It's a reminder that Göbekli Tepe, as remarkable as it is one entry point into a much bigger regional story that archaeologists are still actively excavating today. Researchers are now saying that these sites were likely part of some coordinated project or network, which is exactly what Grok said. And every one of them shares another strange feature. They were deliberately buried. If these sites really were connected, as the AI suggests, then perhaps their burial was connected too. But why would the people who built these monuments deliberately cover them up? Why bury a masterpiece? The burial of Göbekli Tepe wasn't simply the result of time or neglect. Someone deliberately filled these structures in. Workers hauled in tons of rubble, broken stone, and soil, and packed it directly around and over the pillars until the entire complex disappeared beneath an artificial mound. The evidence for that is sitting in the excavation itself. The enclosures were packed with rubble, broken stone, and soil until the pillars were completely covered. What archaeologists still don't know is why they did it. One possibility is ritual closure. Other ancient societies sometimes marked the end of a sacred space by formally sealing it, so the burial could have served a similar purpose here. Another idea ties it to the broader shift happening across the region around that time. The world around Göbekli Tepe was changing. Communities were slowly moving toward farming and permanent settlement. Burying the old ceremonial center may have marked a symbolic break from an older way of life. A third possibility serves a more mysterious purpose. The burial may have been done to protect the carvings and whatever message they contain. If all of these sites record some hidden message, then that might be the reason for their collective burial. As it stands today, nobody knows for certain which explanation is right, and it's very possible more than one factor was involved. But what we do know for certain is that a people with no writing chose to protect their most elaborate work by hiding it completely. That is a very unusual thing. Most ancient people do not hide their monuments. If anything, it feels like they are showing them off. And interestingly enough, the only reason Göbekli Tepe survived was that someone made the deliberate choice to bury it. Otherwise, the stones would have eroded long before Schmidt ever set foot on that hill in southeastern Turkey. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all. After everything we've uncovered, how much do we actually understand about this place? What we still don't know, Göbekli Tepe has already forced archaeologists to rewrite a basic assumption that held for decades. Farming had to come before large-scale organized construction. This site proves that isn't true. Hunter-gatherers were already capable of organizing enormous building projects before farming became widespread. That alone makes it one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the last 100 years. No embellishment required, but plenty of real questions remain open. Ground-penetrating radar survey suggests that more than dozens more enclosures are still buried and unexcavated. We still don't know exactly what the animal carvings meant, and we still don't understand how these communities organized enough people to quarry, carve, transport, and raise stones weighing several tons. Those are the honest mysteries, and the excavation is far from finished. Turkish and German teams continue working at Göbekli Tepe, while the wider Taş Tepeler project has expanded the search to neighboring sites. This story is getting more interesting every year as more of the ridge and its neighbors come out of the ground. And that brings us back to the question that started this investigation. What happens when we ask an AI to explain a site that archaeologists themselves are still trying to understand? The AI can identify patterns. It can connect ideas that might take a human researcher much longer to notice. But finding a pattern is not the same thing as proving what that pattern means. And at Göbekli Tepe, that distinction matters. We know the people who built these monuments were hunter-gatherers. We know they could organize enormous amounts of labor. We know they buried their structures, carved animals into their pillars, and built similar sites across the region. What we still don't know is why. Whether Grok has uncovered something genuinely important or simply found patterns that humans are still debating, Göbekli Tepe remains one of the strangest archaeological sites on Earth. So, what do you think? Were the builders of this site trying to tell us something, or are the carvings just random inscriptions? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next mystery we dig into. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.